Hello and welcome to this video on how much glyphosate residue remains on your food. In late 2018, there was a quasi, if not fabricated, scandal about the amount of glyphosate found on or in food, which was further based on numbers from a 2015 and 16 study. This was trace amounts of a herbicide that scientific consensus holds poses no danger to humans. This begs the question, how much residue was there, and is there any substance to these claims? This video will try to answer that question. The claim is that up to 30% of the food products tested were positive for glyphosate. This is 30% of the 482 fresh produce items, just under 2,500 grain and lentil products, and 209 infant foods. This is a very small fraction of the overall products available for purchase. This very fact is represented in the report's introduction, but it is true that a significant number had glyphosate present. You see here the table of the maximum residual limit, or anything above this. There are parts per million or fractions thereof present, and that is how they measured the glyphosate. This led to a compliance rate of 98.7%, just shy of 99%, and there was no fresh produce, soy, or infant food that was above their respective limit. Overall, the study that sparked this concern found glyphosate the most on grains and lentils, 36.6% and 47.4% respectively. The problem with these low numbers is not their value, but their timing. This was around the same time that Monsanto was being sued for, and consequently lost, a legal battle over glyphosate. This led to the media uptake, as there is a misappropriation of the risk. The reality is that it is a very small fraction that was above the legally prescribed threshold. This one case led to a mass of hysterical articles about the danger of glyphosate. That meant the media believed 1.3% of all the foods tested that were above the threshold of the Canadian study should be causing a wide range of disease, regardless of the population, which is simply a ridiculous number and a ridiculous belief. A past video on glyphosate looked at this particular point. The important takeaway for this video is that acute poisoning requires between 40 and 100 milliliters of pure glyphosate. That's not a very realistic number, given that glyphosate's concentrations are nowhere near high enough. More standard preparations require between 85 and 500 milliliters for acute doses. Chronic exposure, such as from food, is significantly less. You will find a link to the video going into the details in the top right. The important takeaway from this is that the values are nowhere near the concentrations found on any of the food in any study, let alone the Canadian study mentioned so far. At least one agency has set a prescribed daily intake for glyphosate. The Australian Office of Chemical Safety has issued a guideline, and it is currently 0.3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day, or 30 milligrams per kilogram of body weight a day at the highest dose. This dose was tested in a 2-year study on rats and demonstrated no observable effects. The approval for glyphosate gave no cause for concern regarding residue being the key here. So far, this has looked at glyphosate as a neat product. Glyphosate has a half-life of 47 days on average, and it is suggested that it is between 2 and 197 days overall. The key thing here is not that glyphosate is on food, but in it. Glyphosate is absorbed via the foliage, and then some is stored in the plant whilst the rest is pushed into the roots. What remains in the plant is what is measured. To understand how that's relevant, let's take a look at some of these numbers. Honey Cheerios have 0.67 parts per million in them, and regular Cheerios have 1.125 parts per million. The upper limit of glyphosate in the USA is 30 parts per million. The expectation is still that at 30 parts per million, this is 1,000 times less than the expected or accepted lower limit for risk of any toxicity from glyphosate. In order to begin approaching values that are a theoretical problem, you would need to consume ludicrous amounts of one food type. For example, 45 boxes of Honey Cheerios in one day and one sitting. Even then, you would likely encounter another problem first. Excess fluids, salts and sugars being good examples, but not the limitation. This is the most obvious problem with these easily hysterical hit pieces. They ignore the bigger picture. You are at greater risk of trouble from the food and not the herbicide. Looking at all of this, although it may sound scary, and you will find trace amounts of herbicide like glyphosate on your food, it is not worth worrying about. The fact that it has been found should bolster your confidence in the food safety system. They have identified traces of a herbicide that, if you tried to compare it with humans, would be a case of finding 49 people from the entire world's population at the rate of 0.69 per million. A very small fraction. That it has been found is a good sign, more so for the fact that dose it poses no risk to you or your family in any way. So yes, there may be glyphosate or other herbicides present, but they will do you no harm at the rates that have been found. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it useful, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.